and I'll share this with you as well. But I also have a YouTube channel that all these coaching calls that we've been doing. So you're actually the 13th or 14th one that we've done in the last year. They've been really awesome. But I'll get the video uploaded onto a YouTube channel that has all the ones on there because I know like Javi, who we both know, he's not able to make it, and I know he wanted to listen to it and stuff. So, and one of my other former coaches is taking a job at a D1 as a basketball strength coach for men's and women's, and I know he wanted to kind of listen to this too because we're obviously going to talk a little bit about basketball at some point. But just kind of get started on this, Eddie. Appreciate you hopping on here. Like we were saying there before I started recording, we've known each other for I guess it's been 4 years now almost, and obviously being at P3, and we'll get into this a little bit, was really kind of pivotal for me. It was a really good time for me because I was essentially laid off because of COVID from pro baseball, and P3 was like an awesome like little launch pad to keep me busy. So, and obviously you were a huge influence while I was there. So I appreciate you being on here. Um, just to kind of give everybody that's on here and when the guys listen, just give everybody kind of what your title is at P3 and what your kind of main roles and responsibilities are.
Yeah, so title I believe is senior performance specialist. It's changed throughout the years, but senior performance specialist. So it's fancy way to say I'm a strength coach on the performance side. So um, we'll get into kind of the ins and outs of P3, but my role is pretty much bridging our beta or biomech team into the practical, right? We bring it to life on the floor with our athletes. So the prescription, the training. Now that we've kind of opened up this new space at P3, it kind of evolves. There's some traveling involved, so maybe traveling with some guys here and there. Then doing a few things on my own as well. But for the most part, it's just SNC role within these four walls, and then just kind of doing things outside of these four walls that include that under that umbrella as well.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get a lot into more of the P3 stuff, but just to give a lot of the coaches that are going to be on here listening, they're all young, in their first, second, third, fourth year of coaching. Kind of give them a little bit of a rundown on like your background, like where you went to school, what your degree and stuff was, and kind of how you got to be at P3 and what the role that you have now.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad at Grand Canyon in Phoenix, Arizona, which was a really small school, but now they've pretty much everyone knows GCU, thanks to their success, I think, in athletics, but also their just popularity all over TV commercials as well. So I started there, did my undergrad there in exercise science, and originally my thought was I was going to walk on there, be part of the basketball team my freshman year. Didn't really work out. Got really plugged into the training side. Chuck Howard was the director of performance there during that time, and I got to know him, and we just kind of hit it off. My sophomore year, I want to say summer going into my junior year, I started working for him. So back then we had kind of this joint situation where it was like a student and athlete weight room, and they need somebody kind of to work the front desk to kind of help kind of police some of the athletes, some of the students, and training hours, make sure students get off the floor during this time because our evening teams that were lifting had to have priority. So that's how I started, pretty much working the front desk, and then moved upstairs and became kind of a student assistant, essentially, in the weight room. Um, Graduated from there and became a GA. Did my grad program there. During that time, took on a few teams, started with track and field, women's lacrosse, and then assisting with all the other sports. After GCU, I earned my master's in public health, my MPH. Went to Ohio State. Uh, Chris Holman's first season there, I was under Quadrian Banks as an intern. Left there right before conference play. I want to say like around late December, early January ish, Christmas time. I went home, started applying for jobs. So at this point, right, I was like, I just need the experience. Um, I pretty much had my GA position, wanted my first entry level job as an assistant coach, but I knew I needed to kind of find myself in a situation where I was going to be uncomfortable. I kind of embraced that early on, and I'm very thankful I did because it opened my eyes to a lot of like the sports science stuff when I went to Ohio State. I had no idea what force plates were. I had no idea what like a tendo unit was, just because it was GCU. We didn't have the resources to work with those things. We had vendors come and show us stuff, but even then I was kind of like I have no idea what this is. I don't know how I would implement this in my setting with my team. So Ohio State was my first experience to kind of the I guess the big S&C world. Um, After that, I was kind of interviewing for jobs and everything, and then I saw P3, who I'd followed during my time at GCU, post their internship, every seasonal position for an intern on the floor, and I just applied for it. I was like, I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I get a call from Luke Story, who was the director at that time, interviewed me, and next thing you know, I'm on my way to Santa Barbara. 2 months later, started there 2018, and then that took off. Did my internship, and I always tell people you just make the most of the opportunity. Killed my internship apparently. They loved me. Luke ended up taking a job with an NBA team, so there was a need to fill uh, a strength coach role there. And they were like, "Well, listen, you're doing a great job for us. Let's extend you first, see how you do with a little bit more responsibility, and then that kind of leaves the door open for an entry level job." Um, Ended up staying there, became a full time coach in Santa Barbara, the P3 location in Santa Barbara. Was there for a little under 2 years, and then there was another opportunity in Atlanta. They needed another coach out here, so cost of living and just the opportunity to kind of move to a new state. I was like, I'm down for it. Moved to ATL right before COVID, and was here for about 2 years before the Georgia Tech opportunity opened up. Again, that's one of those things where you just in the P3, right? Our ecosystem, you deal with so many teams, you have different partnerships. So a lot of people walk through the door, agents, um, professional athletes, GMs, owners, college athletic directors. So you see all these people. So every day's an interview, whether you like it or not at P3. You never know who's going to walk through that door. Lucky for me, I had a good relationship with the strength coach at Georgia Tech, who happened to leave, Dan Taylor, who's now with the Charlotte Hornets, and he's actually left Charlotte now. And they needed somebody. So Coach Passer was like, "Do you have anybody in mind?" And they were like, "Eddie's down the street. He was worked with basketball players in the past. He's done team setting in the past, so I think he'd be a good fit." Went into my first year with Coach Passner as an interim. Loved it. He loved it, and we're like, let's do it year two. So I think we did a great job from the developmental side. Unfortunately, we weren't that good. So after the second season, obviously, coach got canned, and there was a whole turnover. And luckily, I was able to kind of find myself back at B3. So that's kind of the quick rundown there on my part.
And honestly, I remember obviously knowing most of that, and I think the Georgia Tech thing was just happening kind of as I was kind of leaving P3. I forgot about the Ohio State aspect of it and how that kind of opened your eyes. And honestly, the P3 thing for me is the same way to an extent. Like they've been on my radar since I literally first wanted to be a strength coach. Like I don't know if it's just because of their social media presence. Like I don't know how I originally ever found out about them, but I mean they
Yeah.
were really like at the forefront of the cutting edge of blending the sports science with the performance stuff. And again, for those of you that are only here now and that are gonna watch and listen to this, like you need to go do some research on P3 because a lot of the shit that's in this in our world now wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people like them taking risks and investing a ton of money in sports science and biomechanics analysis and stuff like that. Like they were again at the forefront and kind of doing the cutting edge stuff back when it really wasn't as feasible to do it like it is now. So I'm very thankful for them and everything they've done, and obviously having been worked there, it was awesome. So we're gonna come back to P3, and I also want to come back to Georgia Tech. But before we do that, I want to kind of ask you again, just to help like these young coaches kind of get a frame of mind and frame of reference of just you as a coach, like within the P3 bubble that you kind of have to work within and all that. And even when you're at Georgia Tech, like you personally as a strength coach, like what are kind of your like overarching standards or principles as a person, and then kind of maybe like some just training philosophies, like especially if you don't have all the sports science, like what things kind of do you really like stay glued to?
Yeah. Before we continue, are you guys good? I know there's a gym. There's a session going on right now. I just want to make sure music and
Yeah,
if you
we
guys.
can we can
Okay.
hear. There's a little bit of background noise, but we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Let's see. Answer your question. I've always been athlete first, right? Care about the individual. You hear about it. It's so cliche because you hear coaches post about this on social media, but it's so true, man. Like you got to care about the athlete first as an individual, as a person, and then it makes your job so easy when it comes to buy-in and anything you want to set out to do, any goals, just building that relationship. I think as an individual myself, right, I feed off people's energy. I'm a people person, so I'm less inclined to try to read a research paper and try to be like, hey, this is what we got to do because of this. But I just want to know where you're at. What do you like? What don't you like? That makes my job easy, right? Like, what's your day like? Because I'm here to cater to you as a coach. So team setting is going to be different, but in this space and overall, even while I was at Tech, like my guys, I'll tell them like, what do you like to do? What don't you like to do? And let's do it because at the end of the day, like you're the one that's chasing these goals. you're the one that has these dreams, you want to do this stuff. So I'm just here as a vessel to help the process, right? I'm just a small part in your overall arching goal. So whatever I can do to help, that's my job, right? That's my job. So I guess I'll start there, right? My first foundation is I love people. I love helping people out. I've always had a servant's heart. I grew up in the church and everything, so I'm used to like serving and helping people around. I've done charity work and all that stuff my whole life, so I've always been about just helping individuals. So I guess that's where it all starts for me. It's just like let's find solutions, let's find ways to just tap into these things early on.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I've only really known you. I only got to know you for 4 months, but you're still one of those people that for sure, a lot like the last thing you said about that, just being a good person. Like that goes a long way. Just being a good human being that people want to be around and want to help people. Like that makes being a strength coach a heck of a lot easier. So I obviously that's something I really appreciated when I was with you, working with you. So the P3 side of things. So can you just give everybody like the elevator pitch on what P3 is and like what you guys do and what kind of again what I said, what kind of sets you guys apart, what makes you guys like on the forefront of blending that sports science and the actual the art of being a strength coach and performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a unique space, right? It's a lab and a gym. So I think there's been a lot of changes throughout the years, but all in all, PT was kind of the first one to kind of the first catalyst, you can say, in this space to incorporate right like a lab and a gym. That's very unique. There's research being done. There are questions that are trying to be answered. There's information being gathered. And then there's the applied side where there's music bumping, there's athletes on the floor. So when you walk in, right, I think anybody that is a first time visiting any P3, whether it's Atlanta or Santa Barbara, they're usually shocked because you have like our biomech team, or we call it corner people, back there crunching numbers, dotting people up, testing individuals, and then you have our coaches on the floor, right, with our athletes, just having a great time, weights being slammed, things are going all over the place, and then we have visitors just watching, like, how is this functional? There's a lot of great stuff going on during this process. So P3, our founder Marcus Elliott, had a brilliant idea. He wanted to just figure out and answer questions and say, you know what, the best way to do it is just find solutions. And we need data. We need to have things that are objective, and then have these questions and problems that we need to solve, and use this information to help solve these issues. Um, Anybody that walks in through these doors, all the athletes, it's just the first, I guess, element of it is you have to be an active athlete, whether it's professionally or amateur. So collegiately, high school athletes are welcome. Walking through the doors, we take you through our biomechanical assessment that's conducted by our biomech team. It's like 2K, we're in a movie. We dot you up, even though now, Adam, we're actually markerless, so it speeds up our process. So um, we get these skeletal models that we can analyze, right? The kinetics, kinematics of an individual. Start looking at forces being applied. You jump, you cut, um, you slide. There's a sprinting aspect involved as well, and then depending on the sport, it might be a one leg right jump off of a 18-inch box. Our field athletes might be a little bit different from our court athletes, our basketball guys. Our baseball players, there's a rotational component involved as well. So having these standards, right, having these tests involved gives us kind of the first insight of how the athlete moves, and that's really the question we want to answer is how the athlete moves when we give them full intent, because we want to see what they move on court, on the pitch, on the field. And for them, our job as coaches is to take that information and now apply it and say, all right, you're great at this. Make sure we stay on top of it. These are areas of improvement. And we know based on the research that we've conducted within these four walls that we can get you from point A to point B if you give us, 4 to 6 weeks with this block. And that's really the essence of P3. It's trying to not only just test, evaluate, and I guess move the needle from the sports science side, but it's how we move it. It's we're daily trying to figure out what are we trying to answer, right, as a training community field, but also within these four walls. Because we have our own little side projects here at P3, but also we're paying attention to what the world is asking, right? What coaches are asking. We want to help facilitate some of those answers. So if anybody has a question, we have the data points, and maybe it's going to take have the time for us to find that answer compared to other competitors, or it might take a little longer just because of the space that we live in. It's a little bit more, smaller private sector. So that's what makes it really unique, right? It's a lab and it's a gym, and you have brilliant minds in the same place who have their areas of expertise. Um, Adam was mentioning earlier, we brought a new coach with an Olympic background, so that helped our game now too, right? Adding the speed element, testing that, prescribing that for athletes, right? I think as coaches we all have general knowledge on how to make athletes faster, but if you can bring individuals who specialize in certain things, it's going to attract certain athletes into our space. So that's kind of the quick overview, but I'm sure we'll dive into some of the details here soon.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I think what you said about like being able to essentially just ask questions and solve problems and and one thing that I'm always big on is making sure that if we're putting something in a program, we want to make sure that there's a good reason. It's not just because we saw it on Instagram or that our professor that has never coached a single athlete in their life told us that that's the best exercise, like told us to
Yeah.
do it. Like we want to make sure that we're trying to do it, and that's again one of the biggest things that I took away is like everything should have a reason. And fortunately for you guys, you have a way to validate whether it actually did what it was supposed to do, or didn't do it, and then you can move on and figure out what you need to do better. Um, Again, just to give people an idea, because I know not everybody knows who P3 is. Can you just give us an idea of like when I was there? I mean, we had legit like elite level high school basketball players coming in. There were some NBA guys training there. There was Major League Baseball guys training there. I think there was an NFL guy at the time. Can you just give them a rundown of? Obviously we had the NASCAR guys in, the pit crew guys were in when I was there. Can you just give them a rundown of like what an average day can look at in terms of just the number of athletes that you're getting, the type of athletes? Like you don't have to give us any specific names, but just
Yeah.
you might have an NBA group at this time and stuff like that. Just kind of a rundown of how diverse, but also how kind of elite the crowd is that you guys are working with.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just go about it. These last 2 days, right? Our morning group consisted of our pro athletes. We have two basketball guys who play overseas. Our football guys just left. We had two guys from the Chicago Bears with us. They're obviously out. And then we had a couple people who were in and out of the building who are doing summer league now, right? So they're summer league now that's over, so we expect them to be back here soon. And in the afternoons, we work with our high school crew, and I mean that high school crew, you get a little bit of everything. We have our kids who it's common, right? The parents just want them to do something for the summer, and it's the parents' kind of way to kind of offload them, and they have the resources to kind of bring them to us. And then we also have kids who are at elite high schools who are competing for national championships or here for the summer. We actually just had this Adidas event last weekend, um, Thursday through Saturday, and we were able to test pretty much the top, was it 40, around 40 kids in the Adidas circuit. So that's another layer, right? So we test outside of these four walls. We have satellite um, remote testing. So with USA Basketball, we did that for a while. Through the Adidas circuit, we're doing that too. So you're talking about having data points and having reports on kids as young as 15, 16 years old, and if they make it to the NBA, we're able to track their progress. And if they're local, which we've had the case, I think Adam, I don't know if Jabari was here when you were around. Um, I worked with Jabari when he was a sophomore in high school, and he's an Atlanta kid. So I worked with him at USA Basketball. Then we were going to kind of bring him in the building, and he went to Auburn, and he came into his pre-draft, and now he's in the NBA. So it's definitely not outside of the norm for us to have elite high school kids who are paying for a service, whose parents understand the developmental piece, and they're AAU teams who understand like there's a time to kind of hit the brakes and pause a little bit on the basketball and let the kid develop from a developmental side, right? Athletic developmental side, get stronger, get healthy, because we know that this kid has obviously a lot of room for growth. And once the parents understand that, they get really invested into the kind of the P3 model and be want to be part of the ecosystem for years to come.
Yeah. And on top of like all that, like you guys also, and I don't know if you still do, but you guys also were responsible for doing a lot of like the NBA combine testing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, every year.
Um,
So yeah, we do combine as well.
and you're getting NBA players or potential players that scouts are sending to you guys or agents are sending to you guys to have them run through your whole testing battery. And I mean, when I was there again, I was only there for 4 months, and the amount of professional athletes and just elite amateur athletes that you see walk through that door, and that's just one facility. There's a whole other facility that's probably seeing equal, if not more athletes on a day to day basis out in California as well. So can you? I know you mentioned it a little bit. You kind of got into it when I was talking about like the intro of when you're introducing P3. But can you just give us kind of a rundown of like, all right, athlete comes in, you do an assessment, kind of give us a little bit of, the takeaways, what the assessments that you're doing are. Obviously, with force plate stuff, there's some biomechanical stuff, sprint times, things like that. What are the main testing battery look like, and then what's kind of that first step in terms of talking to the biomechanist, looking at some of the kinetic measurements and saying, all right, we need to get you better at this. Like how does that whole process essentially, basically, how are you blending the sports science data with the performance and the actual exercise prescription, the training program?
Yeah, so we'll do the first thing we do is a mobility screen, right? We'll do like ankle, knee to wall. We'll do our hip, right? IR, ER. We'll do our quad. We'll do our hammy, and that believe it or not, I mean that's going to play a role in a lot of the stuff that we see with the kinematics. So that's the first touch point in our assessment. After that, we'll take them through the actual battery. We'll do an overhead squat just to see mobility from the plates. Standing CMJ. We'll do a drop. We have our skater, which is a lateral skater, a lateral CMJ movement, which is kind of I guess, our unique feature that really separates us from other I guess, competition just from our triaxial plate axis. You're able to see that, right? So you're not able to take that whether if you're using say Sparta, Hawkins Dynamics, like they're not able to have that ability. So we're kind of able to kind of differentiate ourselves a little bit there. Um, from there, it just depends on the sport. It might change here or there, but there'll be a sprint, there'll be a slide, an approach, and then a trap bar jump. So for our amateurs or undertrained population, we'll go 40 kilo trap bar, and for professionals, we'll go 60 kilo trap bar, and then our NFL will do a 60 and an 80 kilo trap bar jump CMJ. So that all kind of wraps up the testing battery. From there, our biomech team has had, hours and hours of dissecting individual movements and looking at different, kinetics and all the forces being applied. So they're able to kind of help really narrow down a needs list for us as coaches to really dial in on the prescription side. Um, for example, one of the big ones that we see with every population group is ground contacts. I think that's been one of P3's early staples. We've been able to lean on is kind of the research, is understanding ground interaction contact. So the minute your foot hits the ground, there's obviously performance implications, there's health implications, right? So understanding that is kind of the first layer in our kind of our reporting and then also our prescription, if that makes sense. We'll take an athlete through a review. So same day review. The minute they're done testing, we'll turn on the screen. Our biomech team and a coach, whoever is responsible for the athlete, will walk them through how they look during the assessment and say, hey, these are things that we want to work towards. These are things we're really good at. And these are things that we've researched that if you give us this timeline, we know we can get this outcome. I think the next layer, Adam, is trying to put concrete, timelines on that. Obviously, right, throwing our guess is good, but trying to really dial in and become a little bit more concise on, hey, we know we good at 5% if you give us 6 weeks. So that's kind of the next phase for us, is really trying to dial in on the prescription and understanding, how effective it is with timelines. Um, does that answer, Adam? I think the
No,
original
yeah,
question.
that's great. So you mentioned like the ground contacts is one of the things that's very common. Um, can you give us like an idea of, or just basically tell me that conversation. You're having that conversation with me that I'm limited with my ability to basically have reactive strength through the lower limb. You're having that conversation with me. Then what would my training program be? Kind of what would be the expected outcomes, and why? Basically, what's the benefit of me doing these certain exercises?
Yeah, so two sides to that, right? The first one is obviously the strength portion. Um, a lot of times the athlete is undertrained, so this is the first time being exposed to weight room. It's not uncommon for an elite athlete who's really good at their skill to be, at that level, but from a training side to be, down here. So there's a lot of low hanging fruit. Um, we rely on a lot of plyometrics and the application of that process to really tackle ground contacts. Um, we take them through depending where they're at, we'll take them through like a robust, um, gradual progression, if that makes sense. of plyometrics, so extensive to intensive, really dial in on a lot of different isometrics for us, overcoming isometrics specifically, some yielding isometrics for the strengthening portion of the ankle complex. But really, what it is plyometric, exposing them bilateral, unilateral, small things from hurdles, really dialing in on pogos, understanding, ingraining that in their system so that once they're out there on the court, when they're on the field, right, those things are subconscious. That's what we want to do is get those reps in, really challenge those systems. And then from there, keeping with the example, right, let's say ground contact is the first need. We're going to say hip stability, maybe some translation, the femur, let's say that some stuff's going on there. Staying with the plyometric thing, kind of progressing them to some, bounding stuff that's going to help address some of those needs as well. So just kind of layering, right, what you want to do with the athlete and understanding like what's my first thing that I want to dial in and how can I use that, prescription to really tackle other things in that needs list to not make it complicated. Because at the end of the day, right, as strength coaches, that like we were talking about earlier, right, you have to have a reason for your exercise selection. And sometimes the answer is keep things basic and just progress that movement slowly, and that'll fix a lot of the issues instead of trying to find the next, sexy Instagram, exercise that's out there that we don't know if it's really stimulating what we think is stimulating.
Yeah, keep it basic and also coach the heck out of it. Like when it's basic, like because that's how you're going to get your biggest input, your biggest influence, and your biggest output from the athlete. Um, so again, this is kind of a just a sports science question in general, and I know we had some of these conversations when I was down there, but like where do you see maybe, and obviously like you don't have to throw anybody or any places, anything like that under the bus. But where do you see maybe some times where people are gathering data and either they're overwhelming themselves with data, or they're just not getting enough data, or they're not able to take that data and actually influence training programs and have help with decision making? Like, are there? I guess what are potentially some of the flaws, or some of the things that maybe you've seen over the years, or maybe even things that you've gotten better at in terms of just understanding things, like how can a young strength coach, or even myself included, like if I were to get a force plate tomorrow at a Division II school, like how would I make sure I don't mess up and end up trying to, go in the wrong directions? Like what are some tips on just how we can make sure we're being more sound with our practice when we have those resources?
Yeah, that's a conversation I always have with the interns that we have here on their way out. We just had a couple guys who actually took some jobs this summer, and that's always a conversation is, okay, you're in this space, you're not taking P3 with you. You could take some concepts, but you have your own resources at those schools. What are you going to do? What do you value? What information do you value? Um, what is your coach value? Because that's going to be another conversation as well, right? You as a strength coach value, you may value one thing, but your coach, your sport coach may value another thing, and that's okay. Now it's putting together a testing battery, or even from a data collection standpoint, whether there's tools, right, GPS, force plates, whatever the case may be, is try not to overwhelm yourself because you're going to overwhelm yourself, right? And if you don't have a sports science team or department to help you, really analyze the data, collect the data, and then interpret the data for the athletes and the coaching staff, you're not going to be efficient at your job. You still have to coach. You have to go to meetings, right? And in the collegiate space, you have all these other things that do not have any relevancy with your sport or anything that you have to do throughout the day just because you have to check off some boxes. So how can you be efficient with your time, with your resources, and with your knowledge, right? So that's a conversation I just had with two interests, like what do you value, and then talk to your coaches about what do they value, because maybe they value something completely different than what you think. You own the weight room, that's your space. How are you going to progress? How are you going to evaluate progress there from a developmental standpoint? How do you know your athletes are getting better? um, does your athletic trainer get involved in the process, right? The medical team, like, is it just healthy athletes? Is that the success? Is it, performance? Is it, minutes? I don't know. So that's always the question I ask the interns is what are you going to leave from here with that you can apply the minute you step on campus with your new team? Because now you're the head guy. Your players are going to rely on you. Your coaches are going to rely on you. So take whatever you need, use it as a resource. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to be the one that you're the hands and feet, right? So you're the only one that knows your context better than us. I can have a say. And sometimes, we see other coaches, do things and we're kind of shaking our head, but I don't know their context. I don't know why they apply some things, it fits for them. It may not fit for me. So each individual is going to be different.
Yeah, I think that's spot on for sure. So, and it kind of gets us into like the next thing I wanted to talk about was which was your time at Georgia Tech, and you kind of already touched on like how that all happened. Um, but like to start off, like what was the first adjustments that you had to actually let me back up to start off. Let's do what you just did. Like what were those first conversations with the head coach, with the athletic training staff, with any of the other sports staff or like support staff like nutrition and sports psych and anybody or sports science if they had that going on there, which I know they had definitely had something going on because they were coming to P3 to do some testing at the time. But like what was those first conversations look like and kind of how did you hone in on okay, here's what we need, here's what my beliefs are, here's what everybody else wants to have happen. How do you hone in on kind of make a plan like right out of the gate?
Yeah, so my first call with Coach Pastner, I guess interview, he said he's like, I want my guys to lift 3 to 4 times a week. He's like, I want them to lift, and I was like, that's not gonna be a problem, Coach. I'm like, that's what I'm here for. So he he's always been about lifting. He's told me like, I want them benching, I want them this, and I was like, there'll be a place and time, but I knew right off the bat his expectation was that weight room needs to be used. So that was good because sometimes you have coaches who are a little bit removed. From the S&C coach, right? They trust you, right? But they're kind of, in their own world. But he wanted to make sure that I had everything I needed. So the first day I set foot there, he walks me in the weight room. He says, "What else do you need?" It's like I want you to be happy in this space. It's like the previous coach had this and that. Do you need that? Do you need something to substitute this, or do you want me to get rid of that? And I said, Coach, let me just get with the athletes first, and then we'll figure it out. So, as a young coach, that's very reassuring when your head coach gives you that confidence, right? To pretty much say, hey, here's the budget, whatever you need, tackle it. I want you to make sure my guys are ready to go. From the AT side, Richard Stewart was my athletic trainer, great guy. He had been at Tech for I think 15 years. Um, so I think he was going into his 15th season with me, and he made my job easy. The way he relayed information, the way he came up with reports, the way we had our staff meetings and discussed, injuries and return timelines and all that stuff, made the conversation so easy with coach because he was dialed in on his stuff that it made me feel like I need to make sure that I need to step up. Um, so whenever guys were ready, he would just hand them over to me and say, "Hey, he's done with me. Make sure he just gets exposure." So whether it's making sure I turn on connects on and just make sure he's conditioning right, get some sprints, some decelerations, little things like that as an example. That makes my job much easier because then I'm not over there wondering what he's doing with Rich. Is he ready to go? Has he done enough strength work? No, it's all dialed in there. Um, and then I guess the last part to that question is figuring out what I'm going to do with the resources that I have. So we had all the tools. Georgia Tech is a research institute, so we have pretty much like this joint partnership with GTRI, which is the research institute, and then we have athletics. Um, and they were actually in the business of conducting some P3 lab work. They wanted to create their own P3. They've been a fan of us. As you mentioned, they tested here. Georgia Tech was one of the lucky schools, one of two really, Georgia Tech and UC Santa Barbara, just because of our locations, uh, that they're able to come and assess their athletes. So they get the same testing that our pro athletes do, and then we were able to disseminate that information to the strength coaches. But now that I'm in that space, it made it much easier because I was pretty much the person running the kids here, doing the assessment and taking them back, and then I had all the information. So it was all real easy for me. I didn't have to really have somebody interpret all that information. I've been in the system for a while. Um, but then, I mean, that's 4 times a year. We would come in during the summer, so their initial testing before we start our summer block, right after our summer block to see what changed, which is good because then I'm able to reuse that 8 week span to really tackle some needs for the athletes. We'll do one in December, pretty much like middle of the season, we'll call it, and then we'll do one postseason like April, right after conference play or tournament or wherever we would finish, kind of as their exit exam. But even within the Georgia Tech setting, right? I mean, I had access to Sparta. I had a Just Jump mat. Um, we had a sports medicine team, so we had Bod Pod. If I wanted to do some body fat, we had a physio uh, physio lab too. So if I wanted to conduct any, VO2 testing and all that, I'll be honest, say I probably didn't use those research as much, just from a logistical standpoint. It was tough. with our schedule and with our coaching staff, always kind of, moving things around for me. So the one thing I leaned on was the P3 assessments, and then I would play around a little bit with our Sparta plates, and then also just things with our medical team to try to just stay on top of. So the biggest thing was just keep things basic. My first year, I was like, I'm not gonna buy anything new, and I don't want to try anything new year one. Let me just settle in. Year two was kind of really establishing myself with some of the information, but the biggest piece was Connexon for me because that was my first actual introduction to some GPS stuff that I was in charge of. So I've seen it before when I was at Ohio State, but I never really was the one operating it. Right, I was the one firing it up and analyzing the data. And funny enough, our GA who had a degree in data analytics, and he actually left mid-season to take a job with Overtime Elite to run their Connexon and their GPS stuff and do all of that. Left, and he was pretty much helping me along the way, kind of teaching me, kind of look at these metrics. These might not be as good for you, or talk to coach. And that's where the conversation with coach really helps because coach really cared about distance and load. That's all he cared about. How much are our guys running? Are they running enough? Are they conditioning enough? And then who's looking tired? That was pretty much it. Um, so whenever it came to staff meetings, those were the only things he cared about. And then it was my job to look at the other things, right? All the other metrics that were involved and say, all right, this guy's jumped enough. Maybe I don't need to give him that stimulus these next couple of days, or this guy needs a little bit more of this, more of that. Really, really effective for return of play. Because then I can really start looking at guys and their gradual progression for return. So make sure they get the right stimulus and exposure to certain things on court was a big piece for me. So I hate that I didn't get enough time to really play with that stuff from a research standpoint. We had a project going on with a couple of our students, with our student managers. Again, I'm at Tech, so I'm dealing with some kids who are just brilliant, much smarter than I am. And they love data, they love numbers, they love this stuff. So I remember telling them, like, hey guys, I want to come up with this matrix that gives us kind of, this outline where we can bucket exercises. And really for return to play, I really wanted to come up with this system that can give me, kind of this green, yellow, red light play, so that guys coming back can really choose 2 or 3 exercises and we could hit them. And it's like, all right, you got your stimulus, you got your exposure, move on to day two. So that's what I was working on. They didn't get to really complete that, but that's just kind of a little bit of a taste of what I got at Georgia Tech during my time there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that sounds awesome. Sometimes that stuff sounds like I get so jealous about it. Sometimes I'm like, man, I wish we had a little bit more. But I also know, like, the more you have, like you said, the more just I don't have time to sit down, like,
Yeah.
between the people that help me that are on this call. Like, I barely have time to. We barely have time sometimes to have a staff meeting once a week. You know what I mean? So it's hard enough as it is. Um, so one of the guys that's not on this call is actually starting like next week at a D1. He's going to be the basketball strength coach for men's and women's basketball at Southeast Louisiana. So I want to make sure I ask a question. Definitely, I was going to ask this anyway, but it's specifically for him. Um, Working with basketball athletes, especially on the men's side. What are some common things that you're going to see in terms of just because of their long levers, maybe just their um, some I hate to say work ethic because some of the guys are absolute workhorses and want to work and want to be in the gym. But some of the battles, like some of the mental battles that maybe you're gonna have to battle at time with them. So just I hate to try to lump all basketball guys into one because it's not really fair and it's not accurate. But just in general, like what would be your advice to somebody that's going into a position where, I mean, and the guy that I'm talking about, he's been working mainly with football for the last 2 years. So like, what would be kind of your advice in terms of like, hey, here's some things that you definitely want to be aware of on top of what you already said, because what you already said was awesome, especially talking to the sport coach and really get an idea of what the sport coach wants. But what kind of things specifically to basketball do you feel like we all need to be better at, myself included?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you started by saying that. Like, try not to lump all the basketball guys into that same generalization, right? Because there are some guys that love to get after it, right? They love to work. So, um, I think obviously you're talking about individuals who are going to be tall, so exercise selection is going to be a big thing, um, and just asking them what they like to do. For me, one thing I had to learn kind of the hard way was I always, and I think it's just bias, right? Trying to have this kind of systematic approach for my programming, and then figuring out like that's not going to work just because I have 3 guys in the room who are 6'8", 6'10", 6'10". Like, I got to figure out how to do this differently because it's just taking up too much space. So that's one thing for sure. It's how you operate in the room. especially team lifts. Our space was not that big, so I had to get kind of creative on exercise selection, equipment usage during certain times, and then honestly, I just use the heck out of our court. Like most of our workouts, like I would just have guys like, we're gonna jump, we're gonna cut, we're gonna do all these things out there. Like if you need a rack, come use it, but I want to utilize the court for like you guys just need to move. Like the last thing you guys need to do is just be boxed into this, into this small weight room. Um, the other thing too, and this is not an area of expertise of mine, is the nutritional aspect. For a lot of these guys, a lot of the vitamin deficiencies that I don't think are addressed, but I was really not aware of until I kind of talked to our nutritionist, and it became a thing. Was like make sure we're giving our athletes this, and that. So each athlete had different things in their cup every morning to make sure they were getting their adequate dosage daily. Um, those are kind of the two biggest things: the logistical aspect from exercise selection point, and then I would say the nutrition part too, which I'm still learning, right? But I think when you're in a college setting, you deal with kids day in and day out, it becomes a little bit more apparent because you see it daily. Um, Here at P3, I don't really have that much time with them. I see them for an hour and then maybe they leave for some time period. But if you're with them, I think that's something that you should probably be aware of and really try to address if you have the resources, obviously, and if you feel capable of doing so, just having a conversation with those athletes. Um, the loading, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't know the last time I squatted a basketball player, like traditional back squat. I'll use safety bar, and maybe I'll adjust maybe the height here and there. Deadlift too, I kind of, depends on the athlete and the training age. If I find it, applicable for them, and if I feel like they're gonna be able to handle that. But a lot of, I honestly, I was not scared to use a lot of machine work with a lot of those guys. I was able to get a lot of strength work with them. And as you travel to, right, hotels, they become best friends. So for me, it was very useful to really tap into that stuff. And I guess the last one would be maybe some occlusion training. Um, Such low hanging fruit there, because a lot of these guys, right? You talking about levers, the weights. I mean, the work that's being done plus the weight. Sometimes that's where they kind of start. Kind of, I'm not saying they give up, but they kind of push back sometimes. But if you throw on some BFR, some occlusion training, and keep the weights light, you're going to get a good stimulus out of that too. And that might be honestly a key for them, and something that they might enjoy because they feel the pump, but they don't know they're actually getting stronger along the way as well. So you're getting stronger, you put on some mass, and you don't really don't have to, put on. You still have to move some load to get strong at some point, but maybe the frequency of it, you kind of play with it a little bit here as a coach to kind of cater to that population.
Yeah, I think for sure the two things that you said that stood out for me is being creative with getting what works, especially when you're traveling. I know we talked to, and I don't know if I ever told, I guess he wasn't working for in the G League whenever I was down at P3, but one of the guys that was up here in Morgantown with us for a couple of years, Ryan, he was on the call back in December when we did one of these, or January, and he
Mm.
works in the G League, and that's what he was saying. He's like, sometimes their workouts, like their training sessions, are 15 minutes on the court right after practice with bands
Yeah.
or a K box or kettlebell or whatever it may be, and that's just what they have to do just to be able to get some sort of stimulus, and that's not just basketball. So I think that's huge, and I think the nutrition point is really big, and that's especially at our level. And that's something that we definitely need to be better at as a staff, because we don't have a sports nutrition or a dietitian on staff, and it's kind of falls onto our plate. Um, and most of our kids are eating chicken nuggets and mac and cheese every day, and they're probably deficient in something.
Yeah.
One of them being probably vitamin D, and just getting out in the sun is probably a huge one that a lot of the kids are, especially in the winter months up here. So yeah, I think those two things for me, and obviously like the occlusion training, that's actually really, I feel like that's the whole occlusion training, the blood flow training. I feel like that's something that came and went, and not enough of us jumped on board with it. To be honest with you, like I remember when I was like
100%.
we played around with it for like a couple months, and then we kind of stopped, and everybody loved it, but it kind of just like went by the wayside. But I definitely agree that's something, especially even in like with a kid that has like tendonitis and that return to play thing, just being able to get him with low load, but be able to get lots of tissue healing and stuff in there. So one last question on kind of the college basketball realm, and this is actually just as much equally for me as it will be for Daniel. So when you guys were, the coach said you wanted to train 3 4 days a week. I assume that was in the preseason. How many days a week did you guys try to get in, like full body training sessions? Did you get in season? And then also, did you oversee all of their conditioning, or did the coach do the conditioning and then you just gave him basically the connects on metrics and said, hey, maybe you need to cut it back or maybe you need to add more, or did you completely handle all the conditioning? And if you did handle all the conditioning, what was kind of your thought process on that?
Yeah, so I did not handle conditioning. He told me from the start, he's like, I'll handle conditioning. He kind of took pride in that. He's like, I want to make sure my guys are ready to go. So I was hands off unless they were coming back from injury or it was punishment or whatever the case may be. Sometimes I had to tell coach, dial it back because we would be shooting free throws and sprinting for almost an hour because coach just wanted guys to get an extra work. And I'm like, coaches, I think there's a smarter way to do this. Um, the lifting portion in season, we lifted at least twice a week. His goal was three, but it was at least twice. Um, Back from our travel day, and then usually, funny enough, our developmental guys lifted sometimes four times because they would get their game day lifts. So we had that too going on for us. Game day lifts for our developmental guys, and then guys that just wanted to participate was kind of more like a PAP right lift, just activate, get some med ball throws. I had a good group of three guys who were pretty consistent. Our starting power forward my first year, he was like really consistent in season game days. He would come in and he was pretty proficient with his lifting background, and I was able to kind of just push with that. So his lifting day schedule looked something like some mobility work, some metaball throws, and then we would go and maybe hit 3 or 4 sets of 1 or 2 reps, some close grip hang snatches, and some jumps and some core work, and then he'd be like, "I'm ready to go," and I'm like, "Cool." And then he'd just go on core, do a shooting workout, and he always said things like, "I just want to feel bouncy. I just want to feel like light. I want to feel like like I'm not dragging my feet." So he bought in early, and then when he bought in, he was having kind of success, which is, I mean, there's no correlation there, right? I'm just like the guy just he came to get to do a lift. The fact he played a good game, it's not because he came in did his lift. Other guys started kind of coming in. It's like I got to do what he's doing. I got to do what he's doing. But the minute they had a bad game, it's like I'm not lifting today because I feel my arms tired. So um, that's what you got to deal with sometimes too.
Yeah, and honestly, it's funny you say that because we have a similar situation. We got a big a kid from Sweden, basically our best player on our team. Definitely gonna be one of the best returning guys we got this year, and that's what he came to me last year because he played like semi-pro. I don't know all the rules with the NCAA and all that shit, so I don't know exactly what he played, but he played somewhere up to pro-ish level in Sweden before he came to Fairmont, and he's a little older. He's very mature, very versed in the weight room. But he's a guy that again, he never did any back
Yeah.
squats or any like regular deadlifting really throughout the season, but always was doing wanting to do extra stuff. Would always come into the weight room, and he's actually the reason that we kind of started having like to go bags where we would have like a med ball, some bands, like some mini bands, things like that, foam rollers, soft tissue stuff. Because I don't have enough with my budget for every team to have their own travel bag. But basically, he came and he asked me, he's like, "Can we put one together for men's basketball?" And I was like, "Yeah." So they traveled with it, and he would do like you said, just some plyos, some med ball slams, something to. I basically put a little package together, had some trunk activation, some hip activation, things like that, some mobility work, and then some sort of little dynamic movement. And basically, that's what it was. And again, I think that's if kids come asking for that stuff, like we want to make sure that we can meet them there and make sure they're not overdoing it, but also give them something that's going to make them, even if it's just a placebo mental aspect. Like
Yeah.
if that's what it is, it works, and we need to like run with that when we have those opportunities because a lot of times. And we have this for a lot of other sports, like they don't want to lift at all. Like we got freaking baseball players that don't want to lift on the same day that they have practice or same day that they're going to throw a bullpen. I'm like, guys, like you're at D2 baseball. You're not in the big leagues. Like you're not getting out of lifting just because you have to throw a 15 pitch bullpen later today. Like it's crazy. But
And
so
it's not even the players. Not to cut you off real quick, but even the coaches, the coaching staff, they buy into it. One of my assistant coaches was lifting with the guys all summer, and then he was lifting with the whole season because his thing was like, I want to feel what they feel, so that when we go to practice, they don't have an excuse.
yeah,
So
no,
that was his whole mentality. So I mean, he was lifting with the guys, and he was moving some of the way that they were moving. And times I was a little worried he was going to get hurt, but I mean, he was in there. He's all like, I got to make sure that they feel that. So when we condition at the end, he's like, I'm running with them, so I know exactly what they're feeling. And it's like half the time I'm like, I'm calling their BS, like it wasn't that heavy of a lift, and I'm like, yeah, no. Like I know what I'm doing, coaching. He's all like, no, yeah. He's like, I trust you. He's like, I want to be there too, so that I can feel it, so I can call them out. So now it's become this accountability thing where it's like the guys are like, shoot, if an assistant coach is lifting with us and he's doing everything we're doing, and now we got a condition at the end, and he's running with us, like there's no cop out now. You gotta finish your sets.
Yeah, no, that's funny you say that because literally today we had the football guys that are here. We had them do their like basically their first trial of doing what their conditioning tests are going to do here in 2 weeks when the whole team's back, and you got guys complaining on like they did 20 reps, and then you got guys complaining on reps 5, rep 6, not making their time. And I'm like, guys, I run this too. Like I do it. I want to make sure that I can pass your fitness test so that I can number one throw it back at you if you try to say that it's BS that you're doing it. So I can tell you that a 34-year-old extremely washed up athlete is able to do the same fitness test that a bunch of 18-year-old former D1 like football players that are now at the D2 level are doing. Like you need to like realize what we're asking you to do. So I love that. I think anytime a coach wants, and that's what we actually at Fairmont with pretty cool. We kind of have like a period in the middle of the day where we close the weight room down, and that's when we all lift. And my favorite thing about it is when some of the other sport coaches come in, like our women's basketball coaches come in and lift. Our A&T coach always comes in and lifts. Like I love that. I love them seeing in there, working like training and again going back to just it's number one, it's for them to stay healthy and fit. But number two, it's like they can turn around and tell their athletes like, yeah, you back squatted today, so did I. Like it's not the end of the world.
It's a
So
healthy
I think
environment. It's a healthy. I love it because even
uh,
pregame lifts, we had two of the assistant coaches and then our support staff. They'd be lifting in with one of the guys, and then I'll jump in there and I'll get my sets in because I know guys are coming in. So I'm like, I can't go, get my full workout in, but I'll do a set here, sit there. And next thing you know, there's seven of us from the men's basketball team in the weight room before the game, and then they go out together. So it's like it's a great atmosphere because then they could just talk about their scouting report and everything, and it makes it so easy. It welcomes the athlete to feel comfortable in the weight room.
yeah, that's huge. That's huge. So, and honestly, that kind of ties in a lot to the next question because obviously, like the big buzzword is like having a team culture and things like that. And I guess what I was originally going to ask is, can you kind of just give everybody like a comparison of the private sector versus the college setting? And you kind of already touched on that because you said basically in the college setting, you're around those athletes so much more, especially when in a situation like you where you're really only working with one team. You're around those athletes so much more. And it's very similar like in the pro setting versus the private sector. Like it's very transient. Athletes will come in, see them for an hour and a half and then they're gone. You don't see them again for another day and a half later or whatever it is. Can you kind of just give like us a background on or just I don't know. I guess your side of the story in terms of I don't even know how to say it, not even the pros and cons of each, but basically just like you know how you approach your day to day and getting to know the athletes better in the private sector, and getting to understand that buy-in and getting that trust, and then also how maybe you would go about it in the collegiate sector the next time that you're working in the college setting or what you did at Georgia Tech, just to kind of give everybody an idea because we have people on here that are and people that are going to listen to this that work primarily in the private sector, and we got people that work primarily in the collegiate sector, and then we got people that work in between. So just a rundown and kind of what your point of view is on those two realms.
Yeah, I think unless you really mess things up, private sector, I mean, they're coming to you, right? So they're trusting that you know what you're doing. They're paying for the service. So I'm not saying it's easier to get buy-in, but I mean, they're here for a reason. They're searching you for an answer. They're searching you for help. So I think it's just fostering that relationship, right? Private sector and just continuing to follow up with them. Like you said, right? It's very transient. So you might see them for 3 weeks and then they're gone. You might see them for a month and they're gone. But always keeping tabs on them. And like I said, it's a people business. So even though right there's a transaction going on, you're still talking to the individual daily. So if you could just tap into them, ask them how their family's doing, understand their hobbies, even hang out with them outside of this setting, I think is very valuable. Um, just so you can see their day to day life, what that looks like. Because depending on the sport, and I hate to use basketball because it's the easiest example just because that's the topic right now. But these guys have their skills coaches, right? Depending on the resources they have available, they might have their own, PT person, soft tissue person that they deal with. They might have their own like speed work person. So you may be just one of five people on their small staff, that's helping them during their off season. So now you have to have conversations with those individuals of what their training though looks like, what the week's going to look like, what the off-season goals are, because that conversation may be different. You may have one idea, and then their person that's working with them in the evenings may have a different idea, and that's going to conflict with how you're going to program and train the next day. Um, Collegiately, right? I mean, that's you see them every day. The one thing I had to kind of dial back is sometimes I felt useless because of the rules in place, right? The hours you're allowed to deal with an athlete, but you could get creative with them, right? You could get creative with them, and obviously there's what's the term they use? Voluntary hours, right? Voluntary hours and voluntary work they can do with them. So there's always a way to always stay connected to the athlete and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. But you're always going to have athletes that want to be there 24/7, who don't, who live, out of state or maybe, international, who they have nothing to do, so they seek you, right? As a strength coach, you might be the one person hanging out with them year round because they can't go home for the holidays because that season, and in summertime they may not be able to go home. So now you're with them, and the hours are all over, but they're just hanging around the facility. And I don't know you guys' setup, but my setup, my office was literally right across from the weight room. It wasn't in the weight room, so I had a little bit of a separation from being there. So they'll pop their heads in. If they didn't see me in the weight room, they know that I'm across, so I could see them. So sometimes if I wanted to, I could initiate the conversation like, "What do you need? What do you want?" And if I was really tired and I want to get at that, I'd just be like, "I hope they don't see me because I'm not trying to hang out another 2 or 3 hours with them." But sometimes you just become a friend to them. They have nobody else to kind of turn to during the summer because there's no one on campus. So I enjoyed it, but obviously there's sometimes, like you said, there's no pros or cons. There's just things you have to kind of navigate through in that setting as well.
Yeah, we actually have you beat. Well, I have you beat. We don't. I don't even have an office. My office is two plyo boxes stacked up in the corner of the weight room, and we all kind of share that as a desk slash water bottle holder, and that's our office now. Um, so the last couple questions I like to ask is really especially for like the younger coaches and stuff. And I would still consider myself kind of a relatively young coach, I guess. But what would be some things that you would say maybe, so when did you graduate from? When did you do your GA at GCU?
I finished 2017. Yeah.
Okay. So from 2017 to now, so in the last 7 years, like what do you feel like has been some of the biggest maybe struggles you've had or mistakes, like basically biggest room for growth that you've had? And not like, oh, I didn't know what, impulse was on a force play. Nothing specific like that, but just from a like personal professional development standpoint, like what would be some of the biggest things that you struggled with and that you've gotten better since?
Not asking questions early. I think that's the first thing I struggle with. Like understanding that asking questions, like for some reason, I don't know why early on I didn't want to ask questions. I wanted to seek answers, but sometimes I didn't know what the answer that I was looking for because I wasn't asking the right questions. So for me, it's always like, don't be scared to ask a question. Um, that's going to help you. That's going to save a lot of time and a lot of effort that down the road. The second thing is just, man, be you, be authentic, right? Don't don't try to be the strength coach you mentored under. I mean, I think there's great things you can pull from individuals, but you're going to be your own coach, right? So if you could, take things from this guy, that guy, um, and put in your toolbox, I think it's great. Start building your own philosophy, how you're going to tackle things, because your context is kind of going to dictate the type of coach you're going to be, whether you like it or not. You're not. It's going to be hard to try to fit, a high energy guy when you have a population that does not, reciprocate that or does not respond to that. So be you. If that's not you, that's fine. That's why there's a lot of us in this field, right? Uh, be effective in your space. And like I said, be curious, be curious. And at the end of the day, the one thing is like the information is out there. So you're always going to read something new. You're always going to have, these things, podcasts now and all these other things, interviews, whatever the case may be, staff developmental calls. Like information is always going to be there. At the end of the day, you're a coach. So you have to coach. That's the one thing that I took from my time at Ohio State. Coach Q, he told me, he's all, hey, listen, you just got to be on the floor. You got to be better. I got to hear you. Like the music's bumping, I can't hear you. Like that's not a coach. Like get the reps in, get dirty, see what they're doing wrong, and don't be afraid to fix it. That's another thing too, right? Like being timid on the floor. Like if you're there to coach, the athlete's going to respond by how you carry yourself, and then the way you explain yourself, how you cue things, right? Get comfortable doing these things. It's okay to mess up. We all mess up. I still mess up sometimes. How I cue, but then I say, my bad. I messed up on this. Let me rephrase it. Let's do it this way. So don't be afraid. We all make mistakes. It gets embarrassing sometimes. No one remembers. So unless you really mess up, right? But that's rare. That's rare. So as long as the athletes don't get hurt, it's gonna be fine. You got to coach the next day. You have another day to look forward to. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think all of that's spot on, especially for me, particularly like as I work with these young coaches and kind of have somehow become, it's weird that I've somehow become like a mentor role. Even, I mean, I like it, but it's like, it just kind of happened like all fast forward, it seems like, is definitely the learning and constantly asking questions. That's huge for all of you that are listening. The coaching is huge. Like you can read a book and you can listen to these videos and you can watch the pod or listen to the podcast that I'm sending you guys. But like if you don't actually put any of that to practice, like, and you're not actually going out there and getting reps and working on certain cues and trying this cue and it doesn't work, trying this cue and it does work, and learning from your own kind of mistakes, I guess you could say, like that's a huge thing that we all need to continue to get better at. And then definitely like being yourself, like taking all the good stuff from all the good coaches you've been around, all the good mentors you've been around, but at the end of the day, still being yourself. I think all that is extremely important. Um, so I guess then on the kind of the same line, and this will kind of be the last question I ask, and we'll see if anybody else has any questions. But like when you guys, whether it's been at P3 or whether you had interns or somebody at Georgia Tech, or some of the other interns that were at Ohio State, um, like what makes some of these other young coaches like stand out? Like what makes somebody that gets an internship at P3 potentially have the chance to get hired? Like what made? I mean, obviously you went through that same process. You got hired. You've been there for 4 years now. Like what makes a young coach stand out? Obviously doing the things that you already said, asking good questions. Being eager to have opportunities to coach, but maybe some other qualities that are consistent across the board that you've seen.
I would say initiative for sure, right? Taking initiative and then bringing some type of value. Because if I have 10 candidates, right, who's going to be the one that sticks out the most? Going to be is going to be the person, the individual who is going to do things outside of what's dictated, right? These are the standards, these are the outlines of responsibilities. They're going to be the ones who are going to be with a little bit more initiative to seek certain answers, take on different projects, challenge me, right? And then, like I said, with that initiative, right, obviously, just work hard, work hard. I think coaches, especially when you're interning, right, you're expected to have your mentor's letter recommendation in hand already, but you have to earn that. Um, just because you intern with me doesn't mean that I'm gonna call everybody and try to hook you up with a job. Like the people who really took initiative did a great job. They killed it on the floor. Um, were high and above the standards that were implemented from the start are the ones that stick the most in my mind, and I know in our ecosystem here at P3 because we value that, right? We value people who are challenging not only the way we think, the way we're going about our research, the way we're going about our implementation with our exercise prescription, but also just being good humans. I think that's the last thing, right? Someone who carries themselves with good character, who's honest, and they're not, like I said, just smooching their way into a job later and trying to use you as a resource. Like we can see that. So young coaches on this call, right? Just be yourself, take initiative and stand out. And I think I mentioned this earlier, bring value, right? Bring value. And that's what we try to do at P3 is the projects that we have in place for our interns and for us as well is to find new answers, find new solutions, find new implementation to the things that are known or maybe unknown right now to us. So I think that's the way you kind of stick, right? And you're able to kind of shine outside of um and in a pool, I should say, right? You stick out in a pool full of coaches is those who bring value to our field because now you can really separate yourself and don't chase the logo. That's the biggest thing that I learned from one of my mentors was like, don't chase the logo, be present wherever you're at, kill the space you're at. Like you never know when the next opportunity comes. And as I mentioned earlier, right, P3, it's an audition, it's an interview, it's you never know who's walking through these doors during the off season. So you carry your job, you do a great job. You never know what's going to happen. There's always going to be an opportunity there, but don't go around, trying to find an outlet or trying to find a shortcut. Because at the end of the day, like when it's your job, when it's your turn to be, the head guy or whatnot, you're not gonna have a team like you said, right now you're part of a team, so um, learn from each other, grow from each other, but obviously have that ambition to be the guy one day, right? If that's the ambition you have in mind, to be a director or be the person in charge, that's great. Just know that during that time now it's your time to kind of lead the next group of individuals. So hopefully you have a good toolbox and you can help those people who are next in line right under you.
Yeah, I think it's perfect. I think one thing I've told some of them before is like if you need it needs to be like undeniable. Like you need to
Yeah.
be the undeniable that you either deserve the position you have or deserve the promotion that you're trying to get or the other role that you're trying to get, and also realize that there's somebody else that's younger and hungrier and smarter and wants to work harder. Like don't let that person like compete you essentially. At the end of the day, you're also, we all work with athletes that are all competing for playing time and opportunities. Like be the same way, like be undeniable with like competing for the job that you want to get and stuff like that. So I think that's awesome. Um,
And I would say last thing, I would say reach out to people in your field too. Like, don't be scared. Like, I think that's one thing I took too long was early on as a coach. Like, I felt like I had to be dialed in. Like, I thought I had to know all the answers when there were people in the same building at GCU who knew more than I did, who had been there for years. But for some reason, I thought like I got to figure this out on my own. I got to find a way to come up with this system on my own. I got to track these things. There's wasting time. There's more efficient ways to go about it. So don't be afraid to reach out to other peers, whether it's in that region of yours or even through Instagram, coaches that you admire, right? Like open up those conversations, uh, and just be curious, ask the right questions, and if you bring value to them, it's a great relationship, right? Instead of you just asking, give me, give me, give me, because I'm sure Adam, you and I both have had those situations where interns just want to be spoon fed, and we're just like, you gotta figure it out on your own, buddy, because one day you're gonna be the one running a team here
no,
soon.
I agree. And honestly, that's part of the reason that we're doing this.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, and honestly, that's part of the reason we started doing these calls. It's I say it's for them, and I've said this on some other ones. I say it's for the intern, but it's just equally as much for me. Like catching up, like I hopefully took as much away from this as what everybody else did, maybe more. So it's one of those things where every time we do this opportunity for these coaches to learn. Maybe one question, just so Eddie can get back to his day. Does anybody have any good questions? All right. Well, you guys didn't take Eddie's advice already. No one's asking any questions. Um, all right, that's fine. We'll wrap it up. No worries. Or maybe if you guys think of something, I know some of you guys might. I know one of you is at least probably working like another kind of part-time job right now and trying to listen to this at the same time. So, if anything comes up, also Javi told me to little shout out to Javi. It's a GCU Antelope connection.
that's another
Um,
that's a real life example right there, right? How
yep,
he got connected. He was one of my athletes during my time at GCU, and then when Adam took the job, he was the head guy. Um,
I was looking for
Were you the one asking about
yeah.
anybody?
Well, I was looking for a GA, and I sent it
Yeah,
out to
you were
like
looking for a
literally
GA, right? Yeah,
every coach I knew. And I was like, "Does anybody have a GA?" And literally, Hobby packed up all of his stuff from Arizona and moved here on a whim without having any clue of what anything about West Virginia. I don't think he'd ever even been like, I don't know if where all he had been. I don't know if he'd been east of the
yeah.
Mississippi at all before.
I don't think so.
So
Yeah, so
yeah, then the perfect example exactly. And he's hopefully about to be moving on to even bigger and better things from where he's at right now. So appreciate everybody getting on here. Eddie, man, it's good talking to you. We got to stay in touch. And I thank you for everything that you've helped me with, and wish you best of luck. Good talking to you.
appreciate you, my man. We'll stay in touch.
Yep.